So we're here today talking with the members of the executive team of two companies focused on indoor agriculture. And I know that most of the people here in the audience are focused on traditional agriculture, outdoor agriculture, but this is an area of big focus for our firm and a growing area within ag and within food. And so we're very excited to have the opportunity to talk about what we do and talk through some of the big questions I'm sure you have on your mind about growing food indoors. So first I wanted to kick it off, Neil and Shami, and just get your take, get your opinion on what's happening in indoor agriculture in the United States. Especially, we're here in California, we're in the Salinas Valley, the lettuce capital of the world. But in other parts of the world, there has been a long history of growing vegetables, growing food, growing fruit indoors. It's not something we have a ton of history with here in the United States, at least not at scale. And so I'd love to get both of your takes on kind of where we are in that adoption. Is it starting to happen in the United States? What kind of scale are we talking about? And also, what are the benefits of growing high-value crops inside? So, Neil, go ahead.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'll try to unpack.
There's a lot in there.
Five questions in there. I'll try to unpack that a little bit. I think if you start from the question of why is this happening in the United States, I think it's Bright Farms focuses on the retail market, and that's our main sales channel. So I'll focus on that piece of it. That's my perspective. From the supermarket perspective, it's happening. They're trying to get more supply that's year-round, that is trying to balance the volatility in perishable produce that you get from field-grown producers like that in Salinas and Yuma. Things like the leaf gap that happened a few months ago, or the drought impact that affected supply the last couple of years. They want to balance that with indoor production. And they also want more food-safe perishable produce. And although the leading players in Salinas spend a lot of their time and have a really sophisticated food safety strategy, that's not always the case throughout the industry. And so they want to balance that with indoor supply of perishable produce. And again, my perspective is very focused right now on what we grow at Bright Farms, which is leafy greens, tomatoes. That's what we're starting with, those specialty crops. So that's kind of the top-down or part of the market force. I think the other part of it is the consumer demand. And when you look at indoor production, what that allows you to do, what that allows us to do, is to grow in places year-round at commercial scale, at commercial volumes that you can't. And so it allows you to decentralize the industry in a way that for most of the last 80 years, the reason why lettuce production has been centralized in Salinas and Yuma, or tomato production has been centralized in Canada and Mexico, is for climate reasons. That's now moving away with the technology available to us that came from Europe. You could actually bring that away and decentralize that and grow produce in the Midwest and East Coast. And that's because consumers want it to happen. You could see trend after trend after trend over the last number of years where local has overtaken organic as a demand driver in the produce category in this country. To some degree, that's because of food safety and quality. It's also a proxy for just understanding the transparency of the industry, knowing where your food came from, which is something that started, and I think a lot of people focus on the millennial population. But if you really look at the marketing data, it's across all demographics in this country. So just to kind of recap, I think it's coming from supermarkets and it's coming from consumer demand as well.
Right. Thanks, Neil. So from our perspective at Lumen Grow, it's a little bit different. We focus much more on the institutional and commercial greenhouse space. We're a solutions provider where we are offering a smart lighting solution, both a hardware and a cloud-based software solution that enables indoor growing to use light as a growth variable. So we are providing not just a basic lighting solution, but you could utilize light to fundamentally alter the plant biology, in addition to create much greater consistency in terms of the delivery of the light at a very, very specific and targeted crop level. We're seeing trends on the food side because of macro pressures of outdoor growing, the volatility, whether it be because of water stress and some of the issues that Neil raised, but we are also seeing that lighting as the ability to use that lighting in a more controlled way, you're finding growing at lower and lower latitudes where greenhouse really makes sense from a controlled environment standpoint. The other trend that's happening that we're seeing across the board is that you're finding growing techniques as well as the cost of being able to construct as well as deliver product from a infrastructure standpoint is being driven down as scale is becoming more and more relevant. So we are seeing that trend in North America. We're also seeing that appetite to grow and indoors internationally, not just in Europe, but in locations like Australia, as well as in Asia, moving more towards indoor growing. Now, that's not to say that indoor growing is going to obviously displace some of the major crops that are there, but having a portion of your growth, if you're an outdoor large-scale grower, to create some level of consistency, particularly in the high-value crops, are critical.
And so when you're talking to the end buyer, be it the grocery store or the commercial grower, I mean, these are businesses, right? And they have to work, the economics have to work. And one of the criticisms we've heard from folks in the space is that it's just too expensive to grow indoors. It'll never compete with field grown. And so I'm just curious, it seems like we're achieving scale at growing indoors. How are the economics? Is this something where the end buyer is willing to pay enough of a premium and that makes it work, or the risk is much lower of growing indoors and therefore over a long enough period of time it makes sense from a risk reduction standpoint to grow indoors?
So I think that answer will vary depending on the business model of the company in the indoor space. So I'll speak to Bright Farms. What we do is we build, own, and operate hydroponic greenhouses, and we partner with supermarkets. And the way we partner with supermarkets is a little bit like in the energy industry, the idea of a power purchase agreement. We call that a produce purchase agreement at Bright Farms. And what that means is that you're signing a 5 to 10 year offtake agreement with a supermarket retailer. And in exchange, they're agreeing to commit to purchase 100% of our production volume at fixed prices, the fixed unit prices that increase based on an escalator. And so what that allows for us is our economics are not as good as the centralized producers because we don't get the benefit of the economies of scale. Because we're operating indoors, there's a little bit of a different unit economics, but because we don't have sales and marketing costs, because we have a customer already spoken for, because we don't have any distribution costs, because we are producing hyper-locally and distributing it a few miles away to the end user rather than thousands of miles away, our overall system economics are better, we feel, than the industry incumbents. And so we've spent the last 4.5 to 5 years proving that out. Obviously, we didn't want to be spreadsheet farmers, we wanted to be real farmers, and it took us the last number of years of proving out the technology, getting past that proof of concept phase, and we feel very firmly that we are there. So for us, the economics are working. I think if you're more of a technology player in the indoor space, that'll be a different answer, and then obviously from from your perspective, it'll vary a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think that what's as technology flows into the controlled environment, into larger greenhouses, one of the things that we found is that when you're talking about something as basic as lighting, taking an existing, very financeable proposition and layering on additional technology to that makes the integration and the adoption a lot more digestible. It's not simply saying, okay, what's traditional lighting versus LED lighting, and the delta is 5x. That's compressed to being sub 2.5 in our instance, or 2 in some cases. But the financeability of that asset, and not just purely financeable on the balance sheet of the farmer or the grower, but we can bring to bear financing options that don't impede on the grower and their balance sheet, because lighting is something that's a little bit more easy for third parties. And we're partnered with a number of financing institutions to be able to do that. So the next layer is, okay, now you have a new technology. Why does that, and it's financeable, how do you then piggyback off of that? For us, it's being able to put in an infrastructure that gathers data and gathers the ability to already have internet connectivity. So currently we have over 25 plus customers that are using our cloud-based software. We are providing a solution, not just lighting across everything from leafy greens to vine crops to, LEDs are not just cannabis driven, right? We're large scale food and floral centric, although cannabis provides some opportunistic opportunities when it's in a large scale greenhouse.
I didn't ask Paul. I'm not sure we're allowed to use the C word.
Oh, okay. But I think that you are finding financing options that will accelerate the integration of technologies as that maturation happens.
So just piggybacking on you were talking about data and the cloud and the amount of information that you're gathering. I feel like in the ag space, we're all, both from the investor side, but probably from the grower side, being inundated with data acquisition and data platform plays. And the question in my mind, and I know it's in the minds of folks here, is, okay, great, you can collect a lot of data, but what do you do with it? What do I do with it? How do we use it? How does it reduce risk and increase margin, increase bottom line? And so I'm just curious, in the in the indoor environment with the customers that you're working with, or with your own operations, what kind of data are you gathering, and what's useful, what's not, and how are you using it?
Yeah, so one of the benefits of being in an indoor controlled environment system is the definition of the control is that you have state-of-the-art climate control systems. And so although we don't have a proprietary system, we collect a lot of data points on a regular basis that informs the climate and the nutrient mix that goes to our plants to help them grow in an ideal way. We use that data to understand, what light levels, what pH levels, what nutrient mixes we would need to, a recipe essentially, to optimize yield and minimize operating costs. So we already collect a lot of data. Our challenge right now is using a lot of that data, and we're building out an engineering and data science team to help us analyze that information. I think the part that's missing that I'm more intrigued about is on the process side, is understanding what's happening to our process flow from seeding to transplanting, germination, and then what's happening in our greenhouse. That climate control system is really input oriented, and it doesn't really get, and to some degree output. It leaves a lot of gaps in the middle for really understanding what's happening to the plant throughout that process, and that to us is the next step. And it's something that I think in the field grown specialty crop industry or the big crop industry, that technology has been advancing for the last number of years. That hasn't happened in the indoor space as much.
Yeah, from our customer base and who we're looking to provide our solutions to, right? You find a theme. If I've got to look at another pretty dashboard with graphs, I'm going to throw up, right? So so I've got the data. What am I supposed to do with it? So we're very focused on actionable data. And at one level, we have a team of plant biologists. We have a half a dozen of those, both in-house as well as external, that are really at our initial stage focused on using light as a growth variable. So depending on the underlying crop, and trying to understand what that solution really means. Is it trying to create additional shelf life for a particular, let's say, leafy green? How do you increase membrane thickness and therefore articulate and deliver a solution that really meets the needs of that entire organization vertically, right? So vertically meaning the marketing side, the growing side, how do we really solve a particular problem? So we're not simply out there saying, okay, use our solution, you'll get better yield. It's really trying to understand what the goal is there. And we're able to, by virtue of implementing our solution, the first stage is, okay, you need lights. that's somewhat of a given in a number of greenhouses. Now you've got an intelligent platform that now is cloud-based, so now you can get real-time access to that data. What other type of incremental additional either actionable data gathering devices do we put on there? So we have a light sensor that creates uniformity. By definition, that uniformity enhances the overall yield from a not just square meter standpoint, but from an acreage standpoint or a hectare standpoint. And then we've got a science team that tries to look at that particular crop to utilize that data to meet a very specific economic goal. Once that infrastructure is laid, for us and for our customer base, the ongoing service and solution is what type of other data that's actionable that we can do, whether it's identifying some stress, whether it's trying to be predictive in terms of characteristics. Those are things that we incrementally do, but we do not solve all of that today. But I think we're very focused on actionable data and really understanding what the economic objective is for that customer.
So that all made sense, and I can tell you both practiced that previously. But what does that mean in terms of increased yield or increased quality? Because I know just in talking to Shami, they've had some substantial measurable gains. But I'm just curious from your perspective, Neil, what have you guys seen? Like from when you started using data and trying to use precise management. What kind of gains have you been able to get in terms of yield or quality or price or whatever metric you're using?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, across the board, we've seen with the use of different lighting, but also for us, water is really important. We grow on pools of water. They're only 18 inches deep, so it's very important what that nutrient mix looks like, and certain nutrients are a little bit better than others, and certain seed varieties impact or are impacted by that nutrient mix differently. The uptake is a little bit different. So for us, that was a learning that we learned very early on. I think as importantly, we've learned some lessons on operating cost savings as well. You know, when we talk about margins, you usually talk about yields as if that's the most important thing, but it's as important to understand what you could do to drive that bottom line margin potential. And so it's led to improved automation, which is something that when people talk about data, they often talk about automation together, and they do go hand in hand. We're fully automated from seeding to harvesting to our packing across the board, and that's been by doing a lot of both old school and kind of technology-enabled data collection on understanding what our process flow looks like. And so we have seen gains. I think the next stage, which we're just starting with now, is seeing changes in color, in crispness, in quality, that kind of thing. We're doing some work with that, but I think we have a little bit more potential to do. So that for us is the next step.
Got it.
Jeff, can I jump in with the question?
Yeah, of course.
I know you mentioned cannabis before, and
Paul saw too many of you on your phones checking your emails.
Well,
he wanted to liven it up, so he's like, let's bring cannabis into the conversation.
while Forbes may not have inhaled, we are very much on top of the trend. And, you know, we went out this morning to Grupo Flor, and, you know, if I heard the numbers right, they think the potential for cannabis is going to be a multiple of what lettuce is coming out of the Salinas Valley. So I actually think it's probably going to have potentially a huge impact on your business. So can we talk about it a little bit more? You've got free reign.
No, if you say yes and Forbes is okay with it, then we're good to go. Shami, tell us a little bit about growing cannabis indoors and what's happening in California and Canada.
Right, so for us, look, the marketplaces are very different, right? If you look at Canada has 43 to 45 licenses. They have 35 million people, right? So your per license ratio to population, they're medically legal. Trudeau has announced in July of 2018 it's going to be recreational, and they're, I would say, at least 3+ years more advanced from a regulatory perspective, from understanding how that's going to be. The market dynamics, the consolidation is already there and has been going on much more so. In contrast, if you go to Colorado, you have over 1,000 licenses, and it's very, very, very fragmented, and California is exponentially more fragmented than that. Our belief is that while you segment between indoor and their premium and aficionado, I think the bulk of the growth is really going to happen in the greenhouse space. And to that end, I'm not sure who you saw this morning, but some of our customers, we have a customer in Arizona that has 40 acres of high bay Dutch style greenhouse, fully turnkey, that is going to be their goal is to be the dominant medicinal grower in Arizona. They're already growing and incrementally growing out on that front. In Canada, we also have a customer that's fourth generation indoor tomato grower. You can figure out regionally where they're based, but they're bringing to bear very, very sophisticated growing techniques, very, very sophisticated indoor infrastructure strategies that are based on more traditional growing and making money on pennies and nickels, and understanding the full use of wholesale and direct distribution channel and marketing strategies as well. So we have a purview of how that has evolved and where the pricing is coming down. We've already heard that pricing in Colorado, you're seeing sales at below production cost. That rationalization is going to happen depending on what state you're in. It's certainly going to happen within California. And they actually are some of the most avid users of our spectral variability, where they're able to control the speed of flowering, the rate of flowering. You're able to alter the percentage of THC. Not everyone wants to max out on 30+% THC. Some want to actually control and reduce it to 5%. And in some states, you have to have that regulatory component. So we're just introducing one variable of light that can control that, but we have more of a I wouldn't say a global, but a broader North American perspective on how that's been rolled out.
And in terms of the economics, Shami, I don't want you to reveal any information that you're hearing from potential customers, but I'm going to throw some figures out there, and you just tell me if I'm wrong.
Oh, shake my hand.
But so I might have heard, maybe in a board meeting, maybe from someone else, that on a square meter basis, switching from, let's say, floral or some other indoor growing to cannabis can yield a 10x increase in revenue to the grower. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the number of acres that will be converted from some type of existing greenhouse growing over to cannabis, just in California alone, is probably going to be in the hundreds. Is that right?
Probably
Okay.
more. Add another zero.
Add another zero. All right. Cool. So, and would Salinas potentially be a good place for that type of thing to happen?
Well, so Monterey County has its own sort of limitations in terms of greenhouse and new greenhouse. So I think there are some different types of regulatory permitting sort of restrictions, but I think Salinas, knows a little bit about growing, and I think that when you look at the traditional methodologies and folks that have sold into that marketplace, we have a small institutional investor that focuses on cannabis as well, but in the same way how California and Salinas in the Central Valley drives the production of 70-80+% of food production in vegetables and leafy greens. Cannabis already holds, on the cannabis side, in the gray and the black markets, has that same dominant position. California does. So as that rationalization happens, people are going to be looking towards California to actually convert and drive that growth.
Okay, so we have 1 minute left, but both of you, 30 seconds. How is the investment landscape right now for indoor agriculture in terms of getting funding for your own company? And what are you hearing from investors about cannabis? Do they not want you to touch cannabis? Are they excited about cannabis? How does the world break down? Neil will give you 30 seconds. Make sure you have it. So.
All right. Yeah, I mean, we've been fortunate. We've raised about $60 million altogether. We did a $30 million Series C last fall. I think even since then, there have been 4 or 5 companies that have raised in the indoor space. I think the market has definitely gotten, I wouldn't say frothy, but it's definitely, there's a lot of funds there. Food, ag funds, tech funds, lots of people interested in a lot of different business models and investing pretty actively. There's a lot of capital going there. We also raised debt, and that's also been an interesting place. We've raised money from Prudential and other players as well. So it's been really, I think it's only getting better for the industry.
I think for us, we've hit several milestones. The company went through a repositioning within the last 18 months. We're fortunate enough to have EIF as an investor, but we're looking to do our Series C sometime in the first quarter. But I think that investors are really looking for traction, validation, and adoption. And we're not seeing the same Sandhill Row investors as active in the space. We're seeing family offices and much more strategics that we've been in discussions with that we've been able to tap and hopefully.
How do they feel about cannabis?
I think you have a mixed bag in terms of cannabis. I think that because we serve more of the institutional market of cannabis, I think there's an openness because we're sufficiently diversified where that's only a minority of our revenue stream. The majority comes from commercial growers.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.